Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Smith. In today's video, we're going to look at 9 greatest lessons learned from Po in Kung Fu Panda. The first Kung Fu Panda, which was released in 2008, was one of the most fantastic movies yet in terms of inspiration. There is a great deal of life lesson embedded in the movie from which we can learn. So without further ado, let's get started. Po has always dreamed of learning Kung Fu, and the day he heard about Master Oogway choosing the Dragon Warrior, he was so pumped up that he asked all his eating customers to leave and go see the event. He in the meantime asked his noodle dad to go see, but as a businessman, his dad asked him to carry the noodle card to sell at the event. Not wanting to disappoint his dad, he decided to take it with him. As a fluffy, big-belly panda, Po was struggling to carry the card up to the Jet Palace, but because of his determination to see the Dragon Warrior, he left the cart and climbed himself up to the Jet Palace. Sorry Dad. He did finally manage to go up anyway, and this brings us to lesson number 1. Giving up is not an option unless it was for loser. No one says it's easy, but it's worth it. Moving on, by the time Po reached the Jet Palace, the doors were closed, which left him outside alone. Well, I don't think that giving up is an option for him, and that's the very reason he tried everything, including knocking the door hard, looking through that rounded window, and yep, that picky hole, smashing the door, flipping on the bamboo stick, and other various ways. He again managed to crash land on the very stage of the competition thanks to the firework. This shows us that where there is a will, there is a way, because when you want something bad enough, you find a way to get there. You make it if you resist. This is the scene when Po was accepted as a Dragon Warrior without knowing anything about Kung Fu. He was tested by Master Shifu to fight against the Furious Five, and it turns out he was easily defeated. For most, we would have a second thought about what we're doing, but for Po, not only did he find joy in being beaten, but quitting for him was never in his mind.
All quits. But a real warrior never quits. Don't worry, Master, I will never quit!
Being such an inspiration, we learned that the real warrior never quit, and there's a common saying that goes, a quitter never wins, and a winner never quits. You have to push yourself through and beyond the limits to get where you want to go. Moving on, the first night the fluffy panda stayed at the Jet Palace, he was trying to see what the Furious Five were up to. He accidentally got into the room where Crane was staying. Even though Po was trying to be nice to Crane, in fact he was actually impressed by the Furious Five in the beginning. Crane, who was rather tired, bluntly said that Po did not belong in his room. As he left the room, he met Tigress, who said the same thing as Crane, but this time to a rather tougher level.
I mean, you don't belong in the Jade Palace. You're a disgrace to... And if you have any respect for who we are and what we do, you will be gone by morning.
This brings us to lesson number 4, that most people will not welcome or like who we are until they really know who we are and what we can be. Po was upset by that fact, so he went out and met Master Oogway. Master Oogway asked why he was upset, and he admittedly confessed that he sucked today more than anyone in the history of Kung Fu, in the history of China, and yes, even in the history of sucking itself.
I probably sucked more today than anyone in the history of Kung Fu, in the history of China, in the history of sucking.
This shows us that Po was very expressive about his feeling, and we learned that it's totally fine to admit that we suck sometimes. We learn so much more by accepting our weaknesses and flaws. Next one, we learned that Po was trying to get away when hearing that Tai Lung had escaped the prison. He argued with Master Shifu that he was not a Dragon Warrior. The only reason he stayed because he thought he could be somebody else much better than he was. He found that Master Shifu was the answer to his problem. In such case, he simply said,
Yeah, I stayed. I stayed because every time you threw a brick at my head or said I smelled, it hurt. But it could never hurt more than it did every day of my life just being me.
This simply shows us that it does hurt when we know we can be the best version of ourselves, but we haven't reached our full potential. After the event of choosing the Dragon Warrior was finished, everyone was going back to the room. Along the way, the Furious Five talk about what just happened that day. Po was the center of the topic. All sorts of jokes, including the dragon warrior fell out of the sky on a ball of fire, or when he walks the very ground shakes, were some of the embarrassing jokes that were very hurtful. Po, who was walking behind them, heard all the gossip and felt very awkward. No matter what, it brings us to lesson number 7. There will always be naysayers no matter what we do, so get used to it and keep doing it anyways. Moving on, when Master Shifu accidentally saw Po sneaking to eat all the food of the Furious Five, he immediately knew that Po could be trained and somehow become the Dragon Warrior as chosen. Without a second thought, he decided to train Po with his Kung Fu master skills. Po went through extensive training during those days and he tried all sorts of physical exercises that he had never done before. He would have given up, but his commitment and learning intensity kept him afloat about all of those physical struggles. As we all know, in the end, he mastered Kung Fu in no time. What we have learned is that no matter how much knowledge he has amassed, at the end of the day, he proudly thanks Master Shifu for his achievement. This teaches us a great life lesson that we should always be grateful and appreciative for those who have helped us to be the best version of ourselves. Last but not least, when Po defeated Tai Long, he walked out of the dust wearing the cooking cloth and putting cooking pan on his head, which made him look like a real dragon warrior. After the dust settled, however, the whole villagers gratefully cheered him up on his defeat of Tai Long. This brings us to the last lesson. No matter how great or successful you become, always be humble and treat everyone with respect they deserve. Also, never forget where you were yesterday. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe more for inspiration.